I would like to share some thoughts with you on the secret life of priest, the secret life of decency and at times heroism. In 1974, I was ordained after 14 years of training. I had my ordination, my first Mass, a great celebration for family and friends in my Society of St. Paul, my religious congregation. And then I took a couple weeks vacation. I was invited by friends out west. And I had my second Mass in a large suburban parish in Colorado. After the Mass, I went back to my friend's home, and shortly the doorbell rang, and a woman was there saying, "Is this where that visiting priest is staying?" They said, "Yes." I went out and met her. She said, "Father, could you come over to our home for a few minutes? We're having a problem." So I left with her. I got in the car. Her husband was driving. As soon as we got in the car, she burst out in tears. When we arrived at her home, her 13-year-old boy was hiding in the basement. Her 15-year-old daughter was packing frantically to leave, just to get out of there, to go anywhere but there. And they shared with me their story of heartbreak, of sorrow, of conflict, of misunderstanding. They called me into their midst at this moment of crisis because I was a priest. After 3 hours of listening with them, praying with them, giving them some common sense guidance, things calmed down. I left, never really to see that family again. But it told me a priest is never on vacation from being a priest. A priest always has to be ready to serve the people of God in whatever circumstances he finds himself in. One of the senior priests in my congregation, widely revered, and rightly so, as a saint in Western New York, one night received a frantic phone call from a woman whose husband and their adult son was having a violent argument. The priest leaves. He arrives at the home. The argument had escalated to the point where the adult son and the father had drawn guns on one another. The priest walks into the home, calmly says, "Let's take a breath and let's put the guns down." Both refused. They didn't trust the other. That's how much rage and anger was there. But they both trusted this priest. So he goes over to them, takes his hand on one gun, takes his hand on the other gun, and said, "When I count to 3, you'll let go." And they did. Took the guns away from them. Spent the night talking with them, listening to them, defusing the situation, returning home in the wee hours of the morning. There was nothing on the news the next day. There was no double murder. There were no arrests. There weren't people surrounding the house with cameras trying to figure out how this tragedy took place. Because a priest was there, being a priest. My first 11 years were spent in New York City. And in one of the coldest winters on record, Mayor Koch asked the churches and synagogues to open their doors to take in the homeless because the problem was overwhelming the city shelters. One priest I knew received a phone call from a group of people asking if he had an extra kerosene heater. He went over to a condemned building where the city didn't know people were living. And he saw about 15 people there, ranging in age from 5 to 75, huddled around those very dangerous kerosene heaters. He made a few phone calls. He found there was a shelter with space available deep in the Brooklyn, and he was on Staten Island. He made 4 round trips, filling his cars with those people, taking them to a place where they could be safe and warm. No tragedy, no fire, no people dying from complications of the cold. A priest just was a priest for them. None of those people were Catholic, but all of them knew when the chips were down to turn to a Catholic priest as their last ray of hope. When I was serving on Staten Island as a young priest, I remember I received a phone call one day from a man who said, "Father, I heard you preaching today. I liked it. I have some problems with scruples. Could I come over and see you?" And I said, "Certainly, come right over." And as a young priest, not having that much experience in counseling people with scruples, I took my pastoral counseling book off the shelf. I opened it up, read a few paragraphs, said, "Okay, now I'm ready to help him with his scruples." Young man in his late 20s comes in, very nicely dressed, very presentable. He was visiting from Florida. And he says, "Father, will I have sold my soul to the devil if I don't get a rifle and start shooting people on the streets?" Well, I threw the thought of helping a person with scruples out the windows. It was obvious he had a very profound obsessive compulsive illness, and it was at a very dangerous point. By the grace of God and with general persuasion, I managed to have him check himself in to a psychiatric ward that very day and get the medicine and the treatment he needed. A month later, he came by to see me. He was flying back to Florida. They had set up follow-up help for him there. He thanked me. He went his way. Part of the normal, secret life of priest. The stories go on, and in an everyday sort of way, with priests around the world and around the nation. There are 45,000 priests in the United States. Each would have tons of secret stories of life and death situations that they found themselves in. I never had the privilege of being in the United States Armed Forces. However, for 7 years I had the Saturday Masses at the little and beautiful Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn that's nestled right under the Verrazano Bridge. And because of that, I got to know quite a few chaplains. And I received an invitation from one of those chaplains to go to Korea with a very special mission of teaching the soldiers not to go to prostitutes. And that was quite an adventure, I'll tell you. The Army, to its credit, took me by helicopter from one base to the next to tell the story of just how tragic the life of prostitutes in Korea were, and how tragic the Amerasian children that resulted from that lifestyle was. But one day, our helicopter got turned back because of bad weather. We landed back at Camp Humphreys, which was my center of operation. And when we returned to the chaplain's office, there were 15 soldiers waiting to see the Padre. Now, many soldiers would not go to church very regularly, but they too knew when the chips were down, when you had no place else to turn, you went to the chaplain. Protestant, Jewish, Catholic, it didn't matter, but in a special way, the Padre, the Catholic chaplain, was held in esteem. So Father Andy said, "You take those 7, I'll take these 8. And we heard their stories of woe and conflict. But after I had finished, he said, "Jeff, I want you to talk to this one fellow yourself." And there was a sergeant there who had received the classic Dear John letter, dumped by his wife. He was enraged, he was homicidal, and he was suicidal. Father Andy and I talked to him, and before the day was out, he was in contact with a very good medical doctor in the Army who saw to it that he had the crisis intervention he needed to save himself from himself. Part of the secret life of priest. It goes on and on, the stories and tales that you'll never hear, but are a part of the fabric of Catholic priesthood.